We are going to cross the ocean today, and we're going to do that virtually. We are getting on no ocean liners, but what we're going to take a look at is how we can work from records in the United States from your ancestors back to your ancestral town and your ancestral family in that town. So we'll be working with documents and understanding how they interconnect. Now, when we go on a trip, we need to prepare. And we need to figure out, first of all, where are we going? That means, where is your ancestral town? And if you don't know the answer to that, we're going to look at some ways that you can identify it. When we get there, we want to know who we're looking for. Now, you may be looking for your grandparents at an earlier time, before they came to America. You may be looking for their parents or their siblings. How are we going to communicate once we're there? That means, what language are the documents in the archives? And how are you going to decipher them? We're going to take a look at creating finding aids that may help you. And finally, we want to look at, do we have someone else's luggage? There are many towns with the same or similar names, and I have worked with two people who are looking at the wrong town. If you're looking at the wrong town, you're not going to find the right family. So we're going to look at how we can verify that we have the right town and we have the right family. So let's take a look at the ways you can identify your ancestral town. We're going to figure out where you're going. I always suggest that people start with oral history. Now, odds are you're not going to have a primary source for that information, but maybe a secondary source, a parent or an aunt or uncle, or a tertiary source, perhaps a cousin. So it's worth starting there and not ending there, because you want to get that information from multiple sources. That's how you have some certainty that you're looking at the right place. So immigration records are a good source if they came after 1906, when that information is included, after September of 1906. And you're going to work your way back probably from census records to the immigration date and then find the record. Similarly, naturalization records after 1906 provide that information. Marriage records are a great source because they're kind of a twofer. You're going to get the name of the town that they're from, and you're also going to get the answer to your next question, their parents' names. And the parents' names will help answer, who are you going to? Who are you going to be looking for? Draft records typically will have the town, and they often have a really good birth date that you can use on Ancestry they'll match it to other records. Landsmannschaft burial societies. When I first started doing research, my father's cousin, when I asked where they're from, said, well, they're buried in the Danilowitz section of the cemetery. I had never heard of the little shtetl Danilowitz, so I didn't know what he was talking about. But it turns out people come over, they stay in touch with landsmen, people from the same town, often cousins. There are societies that fulfill a number of needs, some social, but at the end of their life, burial. And they're buried together. So that's only true in areas where there's more of a concentration. So New York, odds are that you can follow that path. And I was surprised that Danilowitz, which is really a shtetl, that it was at least large enough at one time to have a burial society. Yad Vashem has the towns that the Holocaust victims lived in, were born in, died in. And if you know you have family that died in the Holocaust, you're going to want to look for them in Yad Vashem and see if you can find a record and a town. Or if you have survivors in your family, they may have given testimony on family members who did not survive. And they are in the search engine at Yad Vashem if they gave testimony. And finally, look for wills. I was doing research for a woman whose great-grandfather came to St. Paul, Minnesota in the 1800s, and we could not find where he came from until I found a number for a will. I went over to the county courthouse, to the probate department. They pulled it up on microfilm, and on the first page it said where he was from. Now, it wasn't the name of the town today, so we had to work with that to figure that out, but it gave us a starting point, and that was really valuable. Now, this is an immigration record. This is after 1906 and after September of 1906, which is when the law went into effect. And you can see it says last permanent residence. On the next page, it will tell you place of birth. Typically, they're the same, but not necessarily. On here, you can see Wilna, which is Vilna, Vilnius today. Kovno, which is Konus today. And you're going to want to go to the town finder on Jewish Gen to convert the name if you don't know what it already is. This is a naturalization record. It's the declaration, which is the first one that is filed. And it was filed by my grandfather. Couple things I want to point out to you. Obviously, here we have where it's circled in red. You can see he says, I was born in Kamenets-Podilsk, Russia, which is now in the Ukraine. And note in the top line, it says, I, Benjamin Jaffe, also known as Benjamin Shisher. Now, he entered the country as Benjamin Shisher, but I didn't know that. And I spent a lot of time searching under Jaffe for the immigration records unsuccessfully, until a long time ago. I complained to my mother and said, I cannot find this. And she said, oh, I think he changed his name. He said it was too hard to spell and pronounce. And he had actually sent her a letter in which he said this. So I now have that letter. So I have multiple sources of verification. This document certainly being one, the oral history from her, and the documented history from him. You don't always get the oral history nor the letter. So failing that, keep in mind this is a source of that information. And when we search back into Europe, we want to know what name he went by there. So it's important. The marriage records, this is a marriage record from New York of my other grandparents. My grandfather says he was from Warsaw. My grandmother says she was from Vilna. And neither of those are strictly true. They're close. My grandfather actually was from Radom. I have his birth record. That was 60 miles south of Warsaw. My grandmother was from the little shtetl of Danilovici, which was in the Vilna gubernia and 75 miles from Vilna, now Vilnius. So why did they give this information? I imagine they assumed nobody was going to know the towns they were from, so they gave the next biggest city. So whenever I find a large city, I figure they came from a smaller town around there, and I look in the region. This is a draft record, and you'll see that Dwinsk is the place that they're from. It can also be Dvinsk. Russian uses V's and Polish uses W's, and they're often interchangeable. Note that it gives you a good birth date that you can have Ancestry use to find other records with that date. So, deciphering town names. When I found the will, the name it had was Godlevy. And I looked at that and I didn't know what it tied to, so I did a search on the town finder and I didn't get anything. And then I remembered V's and W's, and I changed the V to a W, and I did a search on Godlui, and I came up with Garlieva, Lithuania. Now, if you look in the detail under other names, it said Godluo is Polish, Godlevo is Russian. And in the time before World War I, which would have been this window, it went by Godluo. Now, why it didn't pick up Godlevy, I don't know, because it is listed as another name. But, you're going to have to massage it. You're going to have to play with it. You want to think about equivalent letters. that, and certainly V's and W's are one of them. Things that are different between Polish and Russian, because both languages were frequently used. So we are going to cross to Lithuania and to Belarus. And this is kind of a double case because we're going to look at both sides of the family. And we're going to do one extra thing. We're going to look at how you verify that you have the correct town. We are using marriage records to connect to Eastern Europe. We're going to use the All-Lithuanian Database. We're going to create finding aids. And we're going to take a look at naming equivalences. So we're going to take a look at, do we have the right luggage? Are we looking in the right place? I was contacted by a woman who said, my father and I are going to Rodham because that's where my grandmother's from, and we're interested in seeing the town she came from. And I get a lot of contacts like that because I do the Kahila link for Rodham, Poland. And I usually will look in my databases and see if I can find anything that is helpful to them as they travel there. She said the name was Ludovitz, but it's really hard to spell and pronounce because sometimes it's a Y and sometimes it's an I and sometimes it's an E. So I went to the databases that I had for Rodham and I looked under the different variant spellings and I found nothing. I wasn't just focusing on given name. I just wanted to find the surname. That surname did not exist in Rodham. I went back to her and said, why exactly do you think it's Rodham? And she showed me this record, this petition, and you can see the woman's name is Celia. It says I was born in Rodham, Poland. So that was a very logical assumption. Nothing unusual about that, but it didn't feel right to me because I would normally be able to find at least a surname. So I decided to poke around a little bit. So I go to Yad Vashem and I do a search on Ludovitch and Rodham, and I come up with one record. Shara Abramowitz, née Ludovitch, born in Rodham to Dov and Nakima. So I'm now thinking, well, maybe I spoke too soon. Maybe there actually is one in Rodham. But I decide to go the next step to the original testimony. Now, the testimony is attached. If it came from just a list of names, as some of the more recent ones do, you won't see testimony. If you see an individual gave testimony, then you can go to that original source. So that was my next step. So this is a section of the original testimony, and it's recorded in Hebrew, but they also have Polish. And I looked at where it had the name of the town in Polish. And I blew it up so you could see it a little better. It sure looks to me like R-A-D-U-N, not R-A-D-O-M, which can sound like a small difference if you're listening to someone say the name. I also looked at the Hebrew and I saw the same thing. Now, I know there is a town named Rodham that is now in Belarus. And you get to know all the towns with similar names when you do a Kahila link because you want to make sure you're not going to confuse the records with the wrong town, right? So I went the next step. I thought, I think maybe I'm back to thinking I was right again. I want to look at her father's record and see what that tells me. So I pull up the father's record, and there are two interesting things there. One is his mother's first name is Celia, spelled T-Z-I-L-A, but it would easily have translated to the more traditional spelling that we know if he were to name his daughter that and she lived in America. Now that's a naming pattern that is not surprising. So I am now thinking, not only have I found the right surname, but I have found the right family. And I look down below where it says place during war and place of death, Rodham. And it's in Lida, which is now, that whole area is now Belarus. So if I map these on the town finder, I will see that Rodham, Poland is 60 miles, 58 miles, south of Warsaw. And Radom, Belarus is near Minsk, and the two cities are 230 miles apart. So while she might have enjoyed visiting Radom, it wasn't going to be her grandmother's town. So there's a lesson in this. Be a skeptic. Don't take everything at face value. You're going to want to look for multiple records that support the key conclusions, like where are they from? And if you have some that say Radom and others that say Radon, you want to probe. You want to look for original handwritten records. As much as we might love to find a typed record because it's readable, realize that there is room for error because of that typed record. There's a secondary recording that happens somewhere along the line when they're working from a handwritten transcription. They may not be able to read the handwriting, they may mishear it, or they filter it through the recorder's knowledge. They may be familiar with Radom, but not Radon. So keep that in mind, and if you find a discrepancy, keep probing until you find multiple records that support a consistent conclusion. So let's look at how we can trace Sam and Celia back to their ancestral town. We knew that, I always start with what I know, and I knew the grandparents were Samuel Bengus and Celia Oludovitz. He is from Vilnius, and I didn't have a reason to question that yet, and I have concluded that she's from Radom. So I want to find the names of family in Europe. Marriage records are my best bet. If I can find a marriage record, it will give me the parents' names, and if I can tie it out to those towns, then I know it'll match. So I go to Steve Morse. Steve Morse basically built a better front-end search engine for a variety of sites. He doesn't do databases, he mines databases. And I knew that he had vital records on his site. So, and especially New York vital records. So I went down the page and I found the section, and this is what it looks like. And I was interested in the marriage records. There are 3 categories. There's New York City marriage records that he's pulling out of Family Search. There's New York City groom and bride records that he's pulling out of Italian Gen. That's the IGG at the end. Now, Italian Gen is not just for Italians. It's for New Yorkers. And there were a lot of Jews who lived in New York. But I decide I'm going to search on Family Search because I know from experience that they are more likely to have the parents' names. And that's what I'm in search of. So I click through and I come up with this record. Samuel Bengus, married in 1914, born in 1891, and I had him at around 1892 or 93, so that's pretty close. Father Elias, mother Shrida. I've never heard of a Shrida. I was guessing it was Frida. Spouse is Celia Elovitz, so the Elutovitz, it kind of got compressed a bit. And her parents were Beryl and Nakoma Sadorvik. That was the maiden name of her mother. So I go, I had this theory that that record I found was somehow related to her because Dove's mother was Celia. But here it's telling me his name is Beryl. What am I going to do with that? Well, I happen to know that you often will hear the name Dove Bear. They mean the same thing. They both mean bear. Dove is Hebrew, Berko, Beryl, they're Yiddish. And you can use the names interchangeably. One of the ways to verify that is to go to the Jewish Gen Given Names database and see in that first line, this is Dove I looked up, it has Hebrew Kalk, and then it has bear. Kalk means kind of the equivalent. And when you see that, you'll find names that can often be used interchangeably, and they seem to be animals for some reason. So I think Dove and Beryl are the same person. That's my working hunch here.